give you a little bit of an overview of kind of what's to come in the weeks ahead. So right now, between April 26th and May 6th, we are hosting daily power chats. These are big ideas with extraordinary leaders, and you are joining our second power chat of the conference this afternoon. We have our main conference taking place on May 7th, and you can go to our website and see the full agenda there, but we would absolutely love to have you. And then the week following the summit on May 10th through May 14th, we will have career chats. These are career coffees, virtual opportunities, especially for rising leaders who are looking to accelerate impact in their careers. So we are looking forward to seeing you throughout these opportunities at the center. I'll give you a brief overview of some of the power chats that we are hosting here at Leading for Good. We have a conversation with the founder and CEO of Braven. We have a conversation with Mamadou Aboussar, who is an extraordinary leader for the ESG movement. We're talking with Renetta McCann, who is the Chief Inclusion Experience Officer at Publicis Group and a true trailblazer for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll have a conversation with Rashad Tabakawala, and he will be talking about restoring the soul of business. We'll speak with Denise Paul on a conversation leading, a conversation with the chairman of Energy BBDO, with Tony Hunter on leading from the front, and Xavier Ramey, a conversation about 1 year after George Floyd and what it means for all of us. And yesterday we had the opportunity to hear from Diana Aviv on leading for social impact. And so that brings us to today, which is a conversation with Michael McAfee, who is the president and CEO of PolicyLink. And we are so excited to dive in. And I want to introduce you to our extraordinary moderator for today. Her name is Deepa Gupta, and she is the founder and principal for Blue Lotus Advisors. She brings over 15 years of work experience across sectors, ranging from companies like Boeing and McKinsey to the MacArthur Foundation. And she is also an extraordinary DEI coach at Baumhart Center's DEI Leadership Institute. And it's just been an awesome pleasure to get to know her through that work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Deepa to be in conversation with Michael. So Deepa, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you, Seth. And hi, Michael. I'm so happy to be in dialogue with you today.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
We had a chance to connect a little bit. I'm going to ask the audience. I know that you all are here because you know about Michael's history. So I'm not going to read you his bio, but needless to say, you know that he has worked tirelessly in his career in a focus on racial equity, healing, and transformation. And right now, he's doing some exciting work on corporate racial equity in terms of really brass tacks thinking about how we build equity into every part of value chains of corporate institutions. But beyond that, Michael and I share time. We think we've known each other on and off for the last 15 years, maybe the first time at MacArthur when I was there and I met you and you had just joined PolicyLink, and then you became the head of Promised Neighborhoods at PolicyLink. And now here you are, president and CEO, and continuing to forge the way. But you started here in Chicago with the HUD offices, doing a lot of work in policy at the intersection of investment and government, private investment in government. And you led a community foundation, which I think at the time you fundraised more money than any other community foundation in America at that time. So that's about as much as I'll sing your praises. And now I'm going to let you do the talking and demonstrate that yourself. But I am a lover of biographies, and I always learn from other people's experiences. And so I don't think there's ever a better question. It's a little bit of a softball, but to hear from you directly about what you'd point to as sort of the 3 or 4 mentors or experiences that have shaped you to where you are today.
First, let me say hello to everyone. It's good to see some faces of folks that I know. In many ways, I'm here because of so many of you all who have wrapped your arms around me over the years, and we've done great work together. But I would say, in my formative years, it had to be my family, on my dad's side. My family on my dad's side, they got ran out of Mississippi because my grandfather, hit a gentleman because he wouldn't pay them after picking cotton. And that's a death sentence in Mississippi. They ultimately went to Sikeston, Missouri, and ultimately settled in Benton Harbor, Michigan. But what I thought was a big hill is a little hill now that I go back all grown, but it was called McAfee Hill. And, you know, they had pigs and all this, they farmed, and whatever was on the table came out of the ground and off their property. But police, no one would come up there, wouldn't mess with them. And so I learned the strength of taking care of your family and standing up for what you believe. And so in a very racialized region of Michigan, I watched my family be activists, and I watched them make sure they took care of each other. You know, and you know, on my mother's side, I watched them care for a community. I watched my grandmother and my mother care for a community. Their homes were always the place that you would go if you ever needed anything. And then as I grew up and I got out and went into the military, in many ways, the military helped me get connected with myself, get out of the fears of achieving and pushing myself and figuring out what I could do, being comfortable with that. And it's also why I left the military after I really got comfortable with who I was. It's like, I don't want to do that. And so when I finally started my career, it was a Jesuit priest, Father Thomas Savage, president of Rockhurst College, and a Republican African-American woman on the Kansas City, Missouri City Council. After trying to sell life insurance and working in the Sprint call center and trying to find my way, I decided I was just going to go for it and try to raise a $20 million endowment for seed innovations in education. I'm probably like 23. They knew I wasn't going to raise the money, but they took me under their wing and they introduced me to all of the elites in Kansas City. And they stayed mentors. They introduced me to a woman named Jan Kramer. Jan Kramer showed me how you wheel and deal in philanthropy and how you make stuff get done, and showed me the tough side of the work. Jan also fired me because she had never gotten used to Black male energy. And so as I grew up and started having my own voice and things, I went overnight from being a star at the Community Foundation to an angry Black man. And so it was a scholar named Dr. Arthur Kemp, who reminded me of why I do this work. And it was my wife, quite frankly, that got me through the years at HUD, where I was kind of like in purgatory, trying to figure it out, doing good work, but not really doing all that I wanted to do. And ultimately, it's been Angela Glover Blackwell this last phase of my career. Being able to see a seminal woman who built a field around equity, and to see the love and grace and strength with which she built and leads a movement even to this day. So those have been people sprinkled out throughout my life. And quite frankly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. You know, their guidance, they're picking me up when I was screwing up, or picking me up when I was in political fights that weren't my fault, but I was not savvy enough to know how to survive them. So that's why I'm here.
There's so much in what you said there about that clearly has influenced the way you think about community and what that means, because you just defined 4 or 5 different communities, some of which accepted you unconditionally and others which rejected you when perhaps you no longer served their purposes. And your ability to recognize that, and this sort of security that you created around yourself, the network, I just so appreciate how you described that, because all along the way you had anchor points, mentors, people who have helped you along the way as you were learning your craft while you were practicing it. So you said something to me when we were talking to prep for this, in your current work, which I want to focus on a little bit. You said, do I deserve to exist in this role? And so I wondered if you could first help everyone who's listening understand the work that you're doing today, what you're focused on. And then I want to dive into this question of self-assessment.
Sure. PolicyLink was started about 22 years ago. It's a think tank. It's a thinking and doing tank. And its job is to create a just and fair society through changing the public policy. It founded the notion of equity in the United States. And so now what we're doing is working to make sure that corporate America comes to equity, and in such a way that they reimagine capitalism and can reimagine their role that they must play in making sure that this democracy works for everyone. We're doing work with the federal government to compel them to become the thing that they've never been, which is anti-racist, quite frankly. and to reimagine our governing institutions to serve this beautiful multiracial democracy. We're asking for our governing institutions to do things they were never designed for. In fact, many of our laws were never designed for this society that we desire. And so our work at PolicyLink right now is to bring that about, and to bring it about for that 100 million plus in the United States who are struggling to make ends meet. That's 1 in 3 people who are economically insecure in this nation. And so when we look at that, we say clearly the design of the nation is not working, for white folks, Black folks, whomever. And so our job is to be able to answer one fundamental question at the end of the day. Have we designed a just and fair society for that 100 million? And are they actually better off because of us having been in the space?
So tell me, you are, in practical matters, you are looking at this not from the rhetorical view, which I think we're in a danger of straddling a view where equity has lost its meaning, and instead are beginning to focus on the measures, the indicators, the practical day-to-day operations in decision-making and governance that have to shift, not may, have to shift in order for us to truly create a just system.
Oh, absolutely. The flowering words mean nothing if you can't become practical about what you're trying to achieve. And so, for example, we are working right now to create a way to score significant pieces of federal legislation that would rival the CBO score. How can you continue to put $6 trillion out in a pandemic and you still have more than 7 million people facing imminent eviction when the eviction moratoria gets lifted? So we're having all these debates that are really quite silly, because you could have forgiven student loan debt. You could have forgiven all of the rent debt that people have accrued because you told them to stay home and not work, and you still would have had some trillions left over. And so, see, this is the idiocy of what we've designed right now. Think about a nation that thought so little of its people that it wouldn't even give them monetary support to survive, when other nations were showing us that really works. And so our work is to get rid of this hierarchy of human value in this nation that basically says, if you're going to give Black and brown folks anything, you'd rather burn the nation down than do anything at all. And that's really kind of where we're at. We watched a nation debate what it wants to do for everyday folks, including middle-class white folks. Yet you saw in the last administration, as soon as he got in, he could pass $1 trillion tax cut. It helps me. His tax cut helps me, but it sure as hell doesn't help that 100 million. And so how can that possibly be, where you can find these trillions this way and flood the market with trillions of dollars, yet from a results standpoint, that 100 million is not better off at all. And many of them have fallen off the cliff because of our inaction and because of our lack of targeting policies that would work for them. And so that's our job, to really actually now begin to create the tools that would check that behavior.
What is interesting about PolicyLink in this time and positioning is that through the work that you've done, Promised Neighborhoods being one example, but so many of the other initiatives and research and innovations that you've invested in, that connection between individual resident level impact to the organizations and institutions that are to deliver that impact has always been the space that you've tried to shine a light on. And so if you were to just look at this now with the measures that you're trying to make, I want to make sure that everybody in the audience is very clear. The work you're doing right now on a racial equity agenda is both for the government at federal and all of its levels, but it's also at the corporate sector, arguably the two most powerful institutions governing individual lives at the 100 million level that you just described. What is the from to? What is the from where we are today in the corporate sector on just one topic, on one issue, on one way of working, that you're hoping the measures and indicators that PolicyLink is developing will allow us to shift to?
So the first thing would be, we're developing a set of racial equity standards for corporations. Because as they come to this work, the threat is what you just said, it gets watered down. And so if you look at our CEO blueprint for racial equity, you'll see a host of ways in which we started that work, right? But the reality is this, as we're talking to corporate America, you can't sit passively by and let parts of political factions turn this place into South Africa and then put out statements that says you care about Black lives, when you just see more than 30 states who have advanced more than 300 bills to make it difficult for Black and brown folks to vote. But what they're failing to recognize, and now some white Republicans are recognizing, is, wait a minute, you're getting ready to really hurt us too. You're going too far. See, the design of the nation is becoming too toxic. And you keep trying to hurt me, but now, because we're so interconnected, you're hurting your own generation of people. And what we need corporate America to understand is, you can't puff your chest out and talk about return on investment if you're not dealing with the design of the nation. If you're going to allow the disenfranchisement of millions of people so they can't even manifest the most elegant expression of participating in a democracy, then don't get mad because your world is fucked up. You see my point? You're getting what you paid for. So what we're trying to get them to say is, stop with all the statements, stop with all of the wanting to talk about return on investment, action absent of the leadership necessary to bring that about. And I use the voting rights one right now because so many people say, well, yeah, no, do we need to be talking about race and things right now? Well, it's ironic that the very folks who would say we're not racist keep implementing racist policies. They keep targeting me. I don't see Black folks designing public policy that is excluding white America from housing, from voting. You see, and so it's so ironic that we still have to debate this. You know, Lindsey Graham just on television this weekend, I don't think our institutions are racist. Really? You don't think they're racist, but yet you're trying to disenfranchise me to vote. You make it impossible for me to even give someone in Georgia water for having to stand in line for 8 hours. Think about that. Think about the absolute cruelty of that. Think about making it a felony now to protest if you block a highway. Think about that. So what you're basically saying is, I want to have the right to just beat your ass down and have you have you in a straitjacket so you cannot respond at all. That's the fight that we're having right now. I want to be able to just totally go ahead and fully step into what I've always wanted this nation to be, which is a nation that was founded on genocide, stolen land, and slave labor. And I want to advance that. And if you try to resist that now, I want to make it so that it's a felony. And corporate America can't sit on the sideline and let that happen. And so, nor can our government, quite frankly. So what you hear us saying at PolicyLink is that the nation is at a crossroads right now. When you read a book like The Dying of Whiteness or Democracy in Chains, what you're seeing is that when I say this world has become too toxic for white America, all you got to do is to come to Oakland, where I live, or San Francisco. And what you see is that folks who work at Google and Facebook and all these companies, and they make a really good living, they still can't afford it. They can't afford it because of the sin of getting rid of public education 30-something years ago, when my parents took me out of it because of busing. We seeded public education. My parents seeded it for a very valid reason, but it's still seeded it nonetheless. And some seeded it because they never wanted to be educated next to me. But it was still seeded nonetheless. And now the consequence is you don't have good public education infrastructure in many of our cities. So you can't afford private school, your rent, or your mortgage. And so this is how the design of anti-Black racism in this nation now is causing people who actually had nothing to do with it to suffer under its consequences.
Thank you, Michael. So you're pulling together so many threads here about whether you can make the basic human rights argument or you need to see it from your own economic lens, from an individual wealth perspective. Either way, at this point, we're at a intersection point where this needs to matter for all.
Yeah. And the exciting thing is to be able to work at a place where you can actually do something about it. You know, this is, as we were talking, this is my soul work. And to be able to create an organization where people can step over the threshold every day when we were in the office and not have to debate whether this is their work, where they can care about all of humanity and just do their job, where it's as fundamental as reading and writing. That is what's so exciting for me in this moment, is that I don't have a lot of excuses for not being able to participate. So when you ask that question around why do we deserve to exist? I believe that if you're not willing to do the work that the moment requires, you shouldn't exist just because you have a good brand, just because you had a seminal leader that you're following, just because you could get by and nobody would know, right? Or they would know, but they would still fund you. I believe that our institutions in this nation need to be able to serve. And that is our path forward, having institutions that understand and are seriously dedicated on increasing their capacity to serve. See, that to me is what the DEI work is all about in the first place. Can our institutions serve the all in the equity definition? Can they see the humanity of everyone, whether it's inside the firm or external of it? And I believe that if we're not going to do that, I don't want to run a PolicyLink that's just going to be playing around, putting data out there. I already know what the data says. It says it's awful, and it's going to say it's awful until we do something different. And I can give it to you in 1,001 different ways every year. I can give you a new report every year, but that's not the work. That makes me have a very nice upper middle class lifestyle, but it ain't really helping people because people aren't housed and fed by those reports.
So you tell me this, because you are leading and you have led. Angela is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. When you and I and Angela met for the first time, I told you that was a shift for me in my own perspective of what I could or should be doing in my role. Can you talk to me about what you're doing inside of your organization, especially since so many of the people in this audience are leaders in their own right of initiatives who are facing into what they're really doing, whether they're really doing the work or they're really just coasting on what's happening and the rhetoric that's coming out. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit, you talked about the people within your organization really feeling like they're living their truth and their purpose now in the work, that there isn't a division, a delta between that. What are you as a leader actively doing to create that environment?
The first is making sure that a management team can activate the soul and not just manage tasks. So we use a frame called the person, role, and system frame. And I want people to operate on all three of those spectrums. Right? It's one thing to be able to just manage people. It's another to say, do you know how your package comes together in such a way that it can inspire people to step into a different possibility, to enact a different possibility? That's very different than just managing grand deliverables and making sure they're done on time and you can write the report. Right? And so we're in a beautiful phase where I want my management team to wake the hell up and focus on that, because we need people who can do their soul work, not just smart people. We need people who want to care about all of humanity, not just good people. And so the standard that I'm setting is, don't come to PolicyLink if you don't want to do your soul work, because it ain't going to be the place for you, because you're not going to ask enough of yourself, first of all, and I will be asking too much of you. Even if you're smart and talented and good, that's not enough. So the first thing is to have a management team that gets this, to have a results frame for the entire organization so that people actually know how to join. And then it gets into very technical things like making sure I don't ever have a salary that is more than 5 times what everybody else makes. Making sure that the lowest person has a above living wage in whatever locale that they are in. I think the lowest compensation at PolicyLink right now is right around $75,000, just based in space salary. So it's making that possible. It's making sure that we're giving people more time off. We just passed a new policy where people get 2 additional weeks off paid this year, plus the holiday break and other things that we already had. You can't ask people to do soul work and not have them renew their soul, right? And so those are the things that we're doing. The world isn't going to come to an end because people are restoring themselves. And if we're that fragile that we've not put systems in place, that's on us. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And then ultimately, I'm being fanatical about asking that question. If you're in Pittsburgh, how much of that 100 million did you help? And a real practical way this comes to play is this. We were in Pittsburgh a few years ago, and we had just started doing this work. And the funder simply paid us to come in and do some technical assistance. And I think that that's work avoidance. And so I was like, why would you go in and do technical assistance and not in service of a result? Think about that. See, that's the work avoidance. Just flying around the country, educating people. Well, that's what the university is for. So if that's all we're doing, PolicyLink isn't needed for that. But when we asked the question, how much of the 100 million is in the region that you're wanting to work in, the answer was 300,000. Then when we asked the question, what do you want to work on? They wanted to work on housing issues. Well, when you started looking at the 300,000, the majority of those folks didn't own homes. They were getting gentrified out of the neighborhoods that they were in. And so what we landed on was passing a tenant protections bill at the state level. So overnight, we went from just by asking the questions and forcing staff to bring their best to the coalition locally, we went from just doing units of technical assistance to passing a tenant protections bill that covered everybody. That's population level impact. And we could have got out of that arrangement just providing technical assistance. And even the community folks would have said, I love PolicyLink. They did a great job. And think about the tragedy of that. While all the while we're doing that work, people are still getting pushed out and can't afford to live in Pittsburgh as it's coming back. And so that's a real world example of how it shows up in place. When you hold that results frame, when you hold the interests of entire populations, you'll start enacting different possibilities from right where you started, with the funder giving us a grant to do technical assistance. We were simply reimagining what the technical assistance should be and what it should ignite.
You just demonstrated two things. You just answered my last question and this question at once, which is, how do you show up different as a leader, and how do you expect your teams to show up differently? In order for us to actually do things differently, we have to change our habits. In order to change our habits, we have to be mindful and accepting about what it is, our purpose, and how we're going to enact that. And part of that begins with just asking the right questions. So it's not enough to know these things and to show up. You have to ask the right questions, receive the answers, and do something different with that information. And you're asking that of your management team, you're asking that of your staff, you're asking that of yourself when you're asking yourself the question, am I worthy of this role right now?
Yeah, and ultimately, I think we have to lead with love. People act like that is soft, but it is not soft. It doesn't mean that we're not accountable and we don't deliver, but why should it be foreign for me to actually love the folks that I'm privileged to work with? What I know is this: if you really don't love your people, you won't work hard for them. That's why we spent the last 20 years just getting to a place where we can say Black people in the equity movement. Think about how many meetings you all have been to in conferences where people say, well, you know what, we talked about equity last year, don't raise it this time. Or can we not talk about race? See, when you don't love your people, you ignore them. When you don't love your people, you don't fight for them. You just saw in this nation what it looks like when people really love their people. They're willing to go to the wall. They're willing to have a damn insurrection for their people. And yet too often we're sitting over here trying to decide, can we just say their names? And so when you can manifest love in your organization and in your work, there is a wide variety of new things that you'll see that you can do. It expands your aperture. And that's what's so fun right now, which is to be able to not tell other people what to do, but be struggling through this journey myself. If you don't taking anything away from this conversation, I'm actually not telling you what to do, because you'll find that you all are brilliant people. I'm telling you what I'm struggling with and my hopes and aspirations for the nation. You don't need me to preach to you. You all are brilliant. But what I'm finding is these things are opening up as I shift in my own leadership, in my own consciousness.
I want to thank you so much for being honest and candid and open and loving and caring in what you've shared with everybody so candidly in this discussion. I'm going to leave this on a little bit of a lighter tip, but I wonder if you could just share in your closing to us, an artist. We share our love of the arts. We were just talking about the artwork behind you, but an artist, a book, the Academy Awards were this weekend, a film, anything that has struck you or has allowed you some inspiration or solace, and why. And I want to say thank you to you. And I am so looking forward to continuing our conversation and watching the continued progress of PolicyLink.
Well, thank you. The first thing I will share is we just did this film release called Many Fires. And it was our first foray into trying to use arts and culture more deliberately in our work to tell the stories of the 100 million. And we just had the premiere of it on Saturday. And what I loved about that was the stories of the people that it told all across the country in every community. And you could see our commonality. You could see the intertwining of our fates. And so that was one, the struggling for us as an organization to learn how to use arts and culture in that. And then another one would be Bryant Lamont, who is an amazing artist in Chicago. If you've never seen his work, you should just check it out. Bryant Lamont, just amazing socially conscious artwork that is just done in just a very beautiful way.
Thank you, Michael. Emily and Seth, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can get some questions from the audience, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Awesome, perfect. Thanks so much, Deepa. So our first question comes from Nicole Johnson. So Nicole, if you're able to come off mute and off video, I'll go ahead and spotlight you so that you can ask our panel a question.
Thank you. Hi, it's been an honor to listen to you and the read that you have provided this afternoon. I had a question. One, are you all developing additional tools that consultants and people that work in the race and equity space can use to build off when we are interfacing with our corporate clients? And the other part of that is, you know, since June, there's been a lot of different thought pieces around, oh, check your privilege, it's whiteness, it's white supremacy, and that's the messaging. Just wondering, what is the, like, now that we're like moving forward and we can see everything for what it is and all the points that you brought up, is what does the messaging need to be now as we work with corporations and the people that lead them?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we'll be putting out a lot of tools. The first set of tools will be coming out probably within the next week or so. We're working with McKinsey to design some of the assessment tools for the federal agencies to look at. But these will be some of the most rigorous things around how can you look at an institution and ask the question, where is it creating opportunity and where is it doing harm? And how do we then begin to correct that? So those will be coming out within the next week or so. You know, I think in this moment, many of us just need to be quiet and be still. It is an awakening moment, but what has happening is that we're becoming so woke that we're becoming ignorant. We're fighting amongst ourselves. We're tearing each other apart. The awakening is the thing we should be paying attention to. So for me, what that means is to be still for a moment and to be quiet for a moment and to trouble the question about what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me with my relationship with women? What does it mean for me in relationship to community? I've got a host of privileges, and I need to be thinking about those instead of just pointing the finger at white folks. If you really take this awakening moment for what it is, you will find that you got more than enough work to do on your own. Because as you do that work, then you're better equipped to do what the first sentence in the Equity Manifesto calls you to do. It says it begins by joining. I can't join any better if all I've done is look externally and blamed everybody else. I could easily do that right now, but I will miss the fact that in this awakening moment, I've got some things to answer to too. And my job is to answer to those things, model atoning for those things, and getting on about the work. And so in the moment, the work for me is to hold the interest of an entire population and ask the fundamental question, what do you want to do in service of them? And I'll give you a really good example. We were talking to one of the largest trade associations in the country who wanted to start a racial wealth gap effort because everybody's on the racial wealth gap right now. And we just said to them, you know, I'll just tell you, you save your money. You can't reverse the racial wealth gap with an initiative. The white middle class was built off of public policy. The GI Bill, the university systems in this country, FHA. And so if you're not going to enact massive public policies, you can never reverse a 400+ year head start. So really sit with that for a moment. Don't just think because you can bring the best consulting houses to the table that you actually have a handle on the problem. You actually don't, because you don't understand the structural design of the nation. And that was mind-blowing for them. But it was also fun for us, because what I'm signaling is Our job is to walk through the world and just tell the truth as we see it. It's other people's job to decide whether they want to do it or not. Because here's what I knew. They can still go do their little initiative if they like. They'll be back talking to us next year or the year after, because it ain't going to work. So it's not going to move the needle. So in this awakening, what we're trying to do is use ourselves as a beautiful instrument that can enact new possibilities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. We're going to come to our second question here from Krupa. And so Krupa, if you're able to come off video and off mute, we'd love to have you ask your question directly here.
Hi, my name is Krupa. I'm sorry, my mute is not, my mute's working, but my video is not coming on. So I
No
apologize
worries.
about that. But yeah, you know, I appreciate your candid perspective. And Michael, you've touched on a lot of the vulnerabilities and the emotional, you know, the realities that come into the disparity here. I'd like to ask you a question as to, it's kind of threefold, right? So one is, where do you see opportunities to build bridges and reduce the divide from the lens of privilege, from the lens of minority groups, and then the lens of a common consensus, right? Like, because each of these three levels, I would think, need individualized attention, because it's kind of like a relearning exercise for the nation. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I would say for me, I'm discovering it's easy for me to build bridges because I don't hold hate in my heart. I wasn't socialized that way, so I don't even have to start with that problem. You know, I care about everyone. I mean, and this is what folks really, you have to think about sometimes your own superpower. It's a privilege that I don't carry that. You know, I'm not trying to screw white people or Asians or my Latin brothers and sisters or folks at the border. I mean, it's a freeing place to start. When I say love humanity, I'm starting from, that's what I was raised to do, love humanity. And so
Right.
I walk into this work joining. Other folks have to do their work to figure out why the hell that is their cross to bear. But I think if you really hold that belief that you really do love folks, then you got to struggle through the hard thing. And that is actually joining and getting in relationship. And I can tell you, I can't stand collaboration. It drives me insane, but I got to do it. And I can tell you right now, one of the hardest things in this moment is working with my equity colleagues. Because we get on a call, we get on Zoom. I'm sure many of you all have done this. You get on all these calls and 6 months later, we still ain't agreed on shit. And I'm like, what the hell? We're all executive officers. Why can't we make a decision? We've not built that muscle up, nor is our capital structured for that. That's part of the problem. But what I am seeing is when I get out of those big meetings and I find a few places where we can build deep coalition, like we're doing with Race Forward, we do great work. We just got off a call today with probably 30 funders talking about what we need for the movement to go forward. And we're now co-designing the assessment tools and things that I'm telling you about from the federal government. But that's been deep work over 2 years to understand each other's operating capabilities, each other's strengths and weaknesses, working through all the staff issues. You know, you can talk about this work all day long about how it should be done or whatever. I'll tell you this, nobody really knows. The thing you need to do is to start doing the work, and you will see ways forward. And I'm seeing that when if I get in coalition with folks in community, they give me all the answers I need about what needs to happen. When I struggle with folks at that national intermediary level, if we can get in alignment, we can do some of our best work to attract investment to folks on the ground, as well as do really bold policy work. And so I'm done philosophizing right now because it doesn't mean anything until you put it into the real world. But what I know right now is the work for all of us is to build bridges. The work for all of us is to set tables where it doesn't look like us. It looks like all of us. And to struggle through the messiness of doing that work with each other. That's that capacity building in real time. That's what's missing right now from our movement. And with what others are doing out there, it really doesn't matter because they're going to lose anyway. The reality is those who are trying to harm and oppress, they're still going to lose. It just doesn't matter. You know, the beauty of being a Black person in America is if there was one superpower, it is that I have been able to learned how to endure pain and suffering and still stay optimistic. You can't defeat me because I was born out of that. The real question is, can you deal with pain and suffering as long as I can? My job is in the process is to take care of myself and not let that eat me away, and stay focused on liberation, because that's where I'm focused. I'm focused on liberation because I know that these folks are cowards and they're scared and they're on their last gasp. And my job is to make sure that this last gasp is maybe 10 or 15 years instead of another 60 to 100. And that is our work, to not be afraid of what the hell is coming, but to be so bold as to think that this democracy is an invitation for all of us. And our job is to create this democracy the way we need it to be. And that's where you see me putting my markers down. And I'm going to do that as long as I have a job. And when you fire me, I'll still do it for free as an organizer.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. And Deepa, thank you for moderating this truly powerful conversation. I can honestly say this is one of the most powerful conversations I have had the opportunity to listen into over the last several months, I would argue year, in terms of how we look into the future and advancing racial justice and equity. So thank you so much to both of you. It's been wonderful to have you as part of our Leading for Good Summit. And I'm now going to pull up some discussion questions for this group, because we would love to have all of you join breakout rooms here. Oh, there we go. So we've got questions for you. The first one is, who are you? What's your current role? And why did you join us for Leading for Good? We want the chance for folks to kind of get to know each other in this virtual space. And the second one is, where do you see the greatest opportunity in your work for cross-sector collaboration? So as Michael said, you know, this can't just be done in the private sector, and policy is at the root of so many of the systemic problems that we see in our world. So feel free to take a photo of this slide here if you want to make sure you have access to those questions. And I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. All right, so for those of you who want to stay for breakout rooms, I'm going to open them up in just a moment here. Okay, all right. So you should get an invitation to join a breakout room, and then we'll come back together just a few minutes before 1 p.m. to close. Okay, the room should be open.